I found out my father's will left everything to my younger brother 2 days before Dad died. The worst part? I was the one who had spent the last 3 years caring for him while my brother hadn't even bothered to call. But what happened next changed everything, and no one, especially not my brother, saw it coming. I still remember the exact moment when my life fell apart. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. The kind of autumn day where the air has just enough chill to remind you that winter is coming, but the sunlight still holds the warmth of summer memories. I was sitting beside my father's hospital bed, as I had done almost every day for the past 3 years since his Parkinson's diagnosis had progressed to the point where he needed constant care. My father, Richard Wells, had once been the life of every party. A successful real estate developer with a booming laugh that could fill a room, and a generosity that seemed limitless, at least to everyone outside the family. He built a small empire from nothing, turning a modest inheritance from his own father into a real estate company worth millions. Dad always preached that family comes first, but his actions told a different story. You see, my brother Jason was always the golden child. 7 years younger than me, he had that effortless charm that made people gravitate toward him. While I worked weekends at Dad's office filing paperwork and learning the business from the ground up, Jason was given freedom to explore his potential. While I put myself through college working part-time for the family business, Jason got a fully paid Ivy League education and a condo in downtown Boston, but I never resented it. That's what older siblings do, right? We pave the way. We understand. We sacrifice. And I truly believed that one day, it would all even out. Michael? My father's raspy voice pulled me from my thoughts that evening. His once powerful frame had withered, and his hand trembled as he reached for the water glass. I quickly held it to his lips, supporting his head as he took small sips. "I'm here, Dad," I said, setting the glass back down. "Do you need anything else?" He shook his head weakly and seemed to drift back to sleep. I returned to reviewing some paperwork for Wells Real Estate, the company I had been essentially running since his health declined. Taking care of Dad and managing the business had become my entire life. My marriage had ended partly because of it. Emily couldn't understand why I devoted every waking hour to a father who had always favored my brother. Sometimes, I didn't understand it myself, was about to step out to grab some coffee when Dr. Morris, Dad's physician, appeared in the doorway with a solemn expression that immediately sent my heart racing. "Michael, do you have a minute?" We stepped into the hallway, and he didn't waste time sugarcoating it. "Your father's condition has deteriorated more rapidly than we expected. His respiratory system is failing. I think it's time to call in any family who needs to say goodbye. I'd be surprised if he has more than a few days left." Though we'd known this was coming, the finality of it hit me like a physical blow. I nodded numbly, thanked him, and immediately called Jason. It went to voicemail, as it had done countless times before. I left a message anyway. "Jason, it's Mike. Dad doesn't have much time left. You need to come now if you want to say goodbye." Then I called Susan, Dad's lawyer and an old family friend. She'd been helping manage Dad's affairs since the diagnosis. "Susan, it's Michael. The doctor says Dad doesn't have much time left." There was a pause on the line. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said, her voice tight with what I assumed was emotion. When Susan arrived, she looked oddly uncomfortable. She embraced me briefly before asking if we could talk privately. We went to the small waiting room at the end of the hall, which was mercifully empty. "Michael," she began, setting her briefcase on the table between us. "There's something you need to know, and I've been struggling with how to tell you this." My stomach knotted with dread. "What is it?" "Your father made some changes to his will about 10 months ago." She pulled out a folder. I advised against it, but he was adamant. "Changes? What kind of changes?" The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Susan took a deep breath. "He's leaving the entire company and most of his personal assets to Jason." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I must have misheard. What did you say? The house, the company shares, the investment portfolios, they're all going to Jason. You're to receive a small cash inheritance, $500,000, but nothing else. 500,000 might sound like a lot to some people, but compared to the roughly $40 million that constituted my father's estate, it was a pittance. More importantly, the company I had devoted my life to, that I had kept afloat while my father was sick and my brother was off finding himself, it would all go to Jason. This can't be right, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. There must be some mistake. Susan looked genuinely pained. I'm so sorry, Michael. I tried to talk him out of it. I reminded him of everything you've done, how you've stepped up while Jason has been absent. But your father was insistent. Did he give a reason? I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. He said that Jason needed the security more than you do. That you were always the strong one, the capable one. That you would be fine no matter what. She paused. And he mentioned something about wanting to make sure his legacy continued in the way he envisioned. The implication was clear, Dad didn't trust me to run the company the way he wanted it run. Despite all the years I'd put in, all the sacrifices I'd made, he still believed Jason, who had never shown the slightest interest in real estate, would somehow be a better steward of his legacy. I sat there, numb, as Susan continued explaining the details. A small trust for my daughter Lily's education. Some personal items that Dad thought I might want. The rest, the bulk of everything he had built, everything I had helped him build, would go to my brother. When did he make these changes? I finally asked. Last January, Susan replied, looking uncomfortable again. After his hospitalization for pneumonia. I remembered that time all too well. I had been at the hospital day and night for 2 weeks straight. Jason had sent flowers and called once or twice, but never visited. Dad had seemed depressed afterward, more withdrawn, but I had attributed it to his declining health, not to some fundamental shift in how he viewed his sons. Does Jason know? I asked. Susan nodded slowly. Your father called him about it after signing the new will. The betrayal cut even deeper. Jason had known for months and never said a word. All those brief, awkward phone calls where he asked about Dad but never offered to help, he'd already known he was getting everything. I need some air, I said, standing abruptly. Susan reached out as if to stop me, but then thought better of it. I wandered outside into the hospital parking lot, the October chill cutting through my thin sweater. My phone buzzed, a text from Jason, on my way. Be there tomorrow morning. So now he decides to show up, I thought bitterly. Now that Dad is dying and the fortune is about to change hands, don't know how long I stood there, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air, before going back inside. When I returned to Dad's room, he was awake, looking frilier than ever. Michael, he whispered. Where's Jason? Of course. Even now, his first thought was of his younger son. He's coming tomorrow, I said, trying to keep the resentment from my voice. Dad nodded weakly, seemingly satisfied. Good. There are things I need to tell him. What about me, Dad? I couldn't help asking. Is there anything you need to tell me? He looked at me with rheumy eyes, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret there. You'll be fine, Michael. You always are. Those words, the same ones he had apparently used to justify cutting me out of his will, hit me like a physical blow. Being fine, being reliable and responsible, had become my curse. Stayed with him until he fell asleep again, then went home to my empty house. The one I'd bought 10 years ago with the money I'd earned working for Dad's company, the company that would soon belong to my brother. Barely slept that night. By morning, I had moved through shock and hurt to a cold, simmering anger. I arrived at the hospital early, wanting to be there before Jason showed up. Dad was worse. The night nurse told me he had struggled to breathe several times during the night. He was conscious but fading. I sat beside him, holding his trembling hand, trying to reconcile my anger with the love I still felt for this failing man. Around 10 a.m., I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. Jason. I steeled myself, uncertain how I would react when I saw him. He appeared in the doorway, looking exactly as I remembered, confident, well-dressed, handsome in that effortless way that had always opened doors for him. But there was something else in his expression now. Nervousness? Guilt? Mike, he said quietly, nodding to me before turning his attention to our father. Hey, Dad. Dad's eyes fluttered open, and his face transformed. Despite his weakness, he smiled, really smiled, at the sight of his younger son. Jason, he breathed. You came. Of course I came, Jason said, moving to the opposite side of the bed from where I sat. He took Dad's other hand. How are you feeling? I watched this reunion in silence, the anger inside me growing with each passing moment. Jason had been absent for years, showing up only for holidays and the occasional weekend visit that always seemed to end prematurely when something came up in his supposedly busy life as a startup consultant in Silicon Valley. Yet here he was, the prodigal son returned, about to inherit everything. Dad and Jason spoke quietly for a while. I caught fragments about Jason's latest business venture, some tech company he was advising. Dad seemed to hang on every word, more animated than I had seen him in weeks. It was as if Jason's presence alone had briefly reignited his fading spirit. Eventually, Dad fell asleep again, the conversation having drained what little energy he had left. Jason and I found ourselves alone in the room, the beeping of the monitors the only sound between us. We should talk, Jason said finally, nodding toward the door. Went to the same waiting room where Susan had delivered her bombshell the day before. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I studied my younger brother, noticing for the first time the lines around his eyes, the touches of gray at his temples. He wasn't a kid anymore. I guess Susan told you about the will, he said finally. Yesterday, I confirmed, my voice flat. Interesting timing. Jason had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mike, you've known for months, I cut him off. You knew, and you never said a word. While I was here every day, watching him deteriorate, running his company, putting my entire life on hold, you knew you were getting everything. It wasn't my idea, Jason said defensively. When Dad called to tell me, I was shocked. But not shocked enough to refuse, or even to pick up the phone and talk to me about it. Jason ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from our childhood. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Mike, guess what? Dad's giving me everything even though you're the one who's actually earned it. Would that have made anything better? It would have been honest, I said. It would have given me time to prepare, to make other plans. Plans for what? You're still getting $500,000. That's not nothing. I laughed bitterly. The company is worth nearly $40 million, Jason. The company I've been running single-handedly for 3 years while you've been off playing tech guru or whatever it is you actually do. And now it's all going to you, someone who wouldn't know a real estate deal if it hit you in the face. Jason's expression hardened. That's not fair. I've built my own career. I've made my own money. And good for you, I snapped. So why do you need Dad's company? Why not let it go to the person who's actually invested in it? Because Dad wanted me to have it. Jason shot back, his voice rising. He asked me to carry on his legacy. To build something that would last for generations. Our family name. His legacy, I repeated. The legacy I've been protecting while you've been absent. The legacy I've put my own life on hold for. I'm sorry it worked out this way, Jason said, his tone softening slightly. But this was Dad's decision, not mine. A decision you were happy enough to go along with. Before Jason could respond, a nurse appeared at the door. Mr. Wells? Your father is asking for both of you. We returned to Dad's room in tense silence. He was awake again but visibly weaker than before. His breathing was labored, and his skin had taken on a grayish cast. My boys, he said, his voice barely audible. Both my boys, here. Jason and I stood on either side of his bed again, a mirror image of our earlier positions. Dad's gaze moved between us, and for a moment, I thought I saw sadness there. I need to tell you both. He began, then stopped, struggling for breath. Don't strain yourself, Dad, I said automatically, reaching for the water glass. He waved it away weakly. No time, need to explain. Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. Explain what, Dad? Jason asked, leaning closer. Dad's eyes fixed on him. The company, your inheritance. My heart clenched painfully. Was he really going to use his last moments to remind us of how unequally he had divided his estate? I did it, for both of you, Dad continued, his voice fading. Jason and I exchanged confused glances. What do you mean, Dad? I asked, but before he could answer, his eyes rolled back, and the monitors began to wail. Medical staff rushed in, pushing us aside as they worked frantically to stabilize him. 20 minutes later, Richard Wells was pronounced dead. The days that followed passed in a blur. Funeral arrangements. Condolence calls. The endless paperwork that accompanies death. Jason and I moved through it all like actors in a play, performing the roles of grieving sons while barely speaking to each other. The reading of the will was scheduled for the Monday after the funeral, just 5 days after Dad's death. Susan's office was located in a historic building downtown, all dark wood paneling and leather chairs. It felt oppressively formal, like a courtroom where I was about to be sentenced. Jason arrived with a woman I didn't recognize, tall, elegant, with the poised confidence of old money. He introduced her as Vanessa, his fiancée. I hadn't even known he was engaged. That's how distant we had become. I was alone. My ex-wife Emily had sent flowers but declined to attend the funeral, and my teenage daughter Lily was away at boarding school. I hadn't asked her to come home for this particular meeting. There seemed no point in her watching her father be disinherited. Susan entered, looking somber in a black suit. She carried a thick folder and was followed by an older man I'd never seen before. Thank you both for coming, she began formally. This is Mr. Greaves, who will be witnessing the proceedings today. Mr. Greaves nodded but didn't speak. Susan opened the folder. I'll begin with the formal reading of the last will and testament of Richard James Wells, dated January 12, 2024. She started reading legal boilerplate, and I found my mind wandering. I already knew what was coming. The only question was whether I could maintain my composure when it was officially announced that my brother, who sat across from me now, holding his fiancée's manicured hand, would receive almost everything our father had built. I tuned back in as Susan reached the meat of the document. To my son, Michael Richard Wells, I leave the sum of $500,000 to be paid in a lump sum, free of tax. There it was. Just as she had warned me. I kept my face carefully blank, not wanting to give Jason the satisfaction of seeing my disappointment. Additionally, Susan continued, I leave to Michael my collection of rare books, my personal journals, and the contents of the safe located in my home office, the combination for which has been provided to my attorney. This was new. Dad had never mentioned a safe, nor had I seen one in his home office. I glanced at Susan, but her expression revealed nothing as she continued reading. To my son, Jason Thomas Wells, I leave the entirety of my shareholding in Wells Real Estate Holdings, amounting to 100% of the issued share capital, along with all associated assets, properties, and investments held by the company. I saw Jason squeeze Vanessa's hand, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. My jaw tightened involuntarily. Additionally, Susan read, I leave to Jason the family home at 47 Lakeview Drive and its contents, with the exception of those items specifically bequeathed to Michael, as well as my personal vehicles and the sum of $1 million to be paid in a lump sum, free of tax. So not only was Jason getting the company and all its assets, but also the house, the cars, and an additional $1 million in cash. The inequality of it was breathtaking. These bequests are made with full knowledge and consideration, Susan continued, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of what might have been disapproval. I have made these decisions not based on my love for my sons, which is equal and unwavering, but based on my assessment of their needs and capabilities. The familiar justification, the same one Susan had relayed to me in the hospital waiting room, felt even more insulting now, hearing it in Dad's own words. Because I was capable, I deserved less. Because Jason was less reliable, he deserved more. It was perverse logic. Finally, Susan said, I request that the attached letter be read aloud at the conclusion of this reading, in the presence of both my sons. She set aside the will and picked up a sealed envelope. Breaking it open, she pulled out several pages of what looked like handwritten text. This is in your father's handwriting, she confirmed, dated the same day as the will. She began to read, My dear sons, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you are both facing the consequences of decisions I have made that may seem unfair or even cruel. Before you judge me too harshly, I ask that you hear my explanation. Michael, my firstborn, from the day you arrived, you showed a strength and determination that amazed me. You learned to walk early, to read early, to take charge early. You were always the responsible one, the planner, the rock. When your mother died, though you were only 15, you stepped up in ways no child should have to. You became my confidant, my right hand, often more parent than child. Jason, my youngest, you came into our already formed family like a whirlwind. Curious, creative, always testing boundaries. Where Michael was steady, you were spontaneous. Where he was cautious, you took risks. You struggled after your mother's death, acting out in ways that worried me deeply. I fear that in my concern for you, I may have allowed you too much freedom, too little accountability. As you grew into men, these patterns continued. Michael, you joined the family business, learned every aspect of it, and eventually became its de facto leader when my health began to fail. Jason, you forged your own path, starting and abandoning various ventures, always searching for something that I fear you may never find. The decision I have made regarding my estate is not about love or merit. It is about what I believe each of you needs to grow into the men you are capable of becoming. Michael, you have already proven yourself capable of building and maintaining success. The money I leave you is seed capital for whatever you choose to create next. But more importantly, I leave you my journals and the contents of my safe. Inside, you will find documentation of every major decision I made in building Wells Real Estate, including mistakes that cost us dearly and opportunities we missed. Learn from them. They are worth far more than money. Jason, I leave you the company and the bulk of my estate not as a reward, but as a responsibility. A chance to prove, to yourself more than anyone, that you can commit to something larger than yourself. That you can be trusted with a legacy, but there is one condition that Susan has been instructed not to reveal until now. Susan paused here, looking up at both of us. Jason had gone very still, his earlier smile completely gone. I found myself leaning forward, suddenly alert. Susan continued reading. The ownership of Wells Real Estate Holdings will indeed pass to Jason upon my death. However, control of the company, the position of CEO and chairman, will be held by Michael for a period of 5 years. During this time, all major decisions regarding the company's direction, investments, and strategy must be approved by Michael. Jason will receive the profits and dividends as the owner, but Michael will guide the ship. After 5 years, if and only if Michael deems Jason ready to take control, ownership and control will be united under Jason. If, however, Michael determines that Jason is not prepared to lead the company responsibly, Michael will have the option to purchase the company from Jason at a fair market value determined by independent assessment. This arrangement may seem unusual or even manipulative. Perhaps it is. But it reflects my deep belief that both of you need something from the other. Michael, you need to learn to let go, to build something of your own rather than simply maintaining what I created. Jason, you need to learn commitment, responsibility, and the value of the legacy you have been given. Hope that in working together, something you have rarely done as adults, you might rebuild the bond you had as children. Before resentment and competition pulled you apart. Before I, in my flawed parenting, allowed that distance to grow, I ask you both to honor this request, not for my sake, but for your own. And for the sake of the Wells name, which I hope will continue long after I am gone. with love to you both, your father, Richard James Wells. Susan finished reading and looked up. The room was completely silent. I stared at her, trying to process what I'd just heard. Jason looked equally stunned. Is this legal? Jason finally asked, his voice tight. Entirely, Susan confirmed. Your father set up a trust structure that makes this arrangement binding. The company shares transfer to you immediately, Jason, but the trust imposes these conditions on their management. So I own the company, but Mike runs it? Jason clarified, his expression darkening. For 5 years, Susan nodded. Or until you purchase his management rights, which is also possible under the terms of the trust. The details are quite complex, but essentially, you two are being forced to work together. I couldn't help it, I laughed. It was either that or cry. All the anger, all the resentment I had been harboring toward my father and brother suddenly seemed beside the point. Dad hadn't simply chosen Jason over me. He had created a situation where we were bound together, whether we liked it or not. This is ridiculous, Jason said, standing abruptly. I need to consult my own lawyer. You're welcome to do so, Susan replied calmly, but I assure you, the arrangement is legally sound. Your father went to great lengths to ensure it would be. I looked at Jason, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Behind the anger in his eyes, I saw something else. Fear. He had been counting on this inheritance, perhaps had already made plans based on it, and now he was discovering strings he hadn't anticipated. We should talk, I said, echoing his words from the hospital. Privately. Jason glanced at Vanessa, who gave a slight nod. Fine, he said. But not here. We agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. Susan provided us each with copies of the will and the letter, along with a detailed explanation of the trust structure. As I was leaving, she handed me a small envelope. The combination to your father's safe, she explained. And Michael, there's something else you should know. Your father asked me to tell you that what's in that safe is worth far more than the company. The coffee shop was busy, neutral territory filled with the ambient noise of normality. Jason and I found a corner table far from the other patrons. For a while, we just sat there, stirring drinks we barely tasted. Did you know about any of this? Jason finally asked. No, I said truthfully. I knew about the original distribution, that you were getting the company and almost everything else. But this arrangement, no. I had no idea. It's typical Dad, isn't it? Jason said with a bitter laugh. Controlling from beyond the grave. Despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly. He always did like to have the last word. So what do we do now? The question hung between us. What indeed? I had spent the last several days preparing myself to walk away from Wells Real Estate, to start over at 45. Now I was being told I would still be running it, but for my brother's benefit. It was nearly as insulting as being cut out entirely. We have options, I said slowly. We could fight it, spend a fortune on lawyers trying to break the trust. We could try to work with it, you as owner, me as CEO, figuring it out as we go. Or what? Jason prompted when I trailed off. Or we could do what Dad apparently wanted. Actually work together. Try to understand why he set things up this way. I paused. Before we decide anything, I need to see what's in that safe. Jason nodded slowly. Mind if I come along? Since we're supposedly in this together now. His tone was sarcastic, but there was something in his expression, a vulnerability, perhaps, that made me agree. We drove separately to Dad's house, soon to be Jason's house. It felt strange using my key knowing that I would soon have no right to enter freely. The house was quiet, still full of Dad's presence. His coffee mug still sat by his favorite chair. His reading glasses still perched on top of a half-finished novel, went to his office, a wood-paneled room that had always intimidated me as a child. Now it just seemed smaller than I remembered. The safe wasn't immediately visible, which was odd since I had spent plenty of time in this room over the years. It must be hidden, Jason suggested, running his hand along the bookshelf. Behind a book or a painting or something. We searched for nearly half an hour before finding it, concealed behind a false panel in the bottom of Dad's antique desk. It was small but sturdy, with a digital keypad. I entered the combination Susan had given me, and it clicked open. Inside was a stack of journals, decades worth, by the look of them, several USB drives, and a thick manila envelope with both our names written on it in Dad's distinctive handwriting. I lifted out the envelope first, opening it carefully. Inside was a manuscript of some kind, along with several folders of documents. The manuscript's title page read, "The Wells Legacy, the complete history of Wells Real Estate Holdings, the public story and the private truth." "What is it?" Jason asked, peering over my shoulder. "I think it's Dad's confession," I said slowly, leafing through the pages. "Look at this." The document detailed the founding of Wells Real Estate, but not the version I had always heard. According to these pages, Dad hadn't built the company from a small inheritance as family lore suggested. He had manipulated his way into controlling interest of his former employer's company during a financial crisis, essentially stealing it out from under the man who had given him his start in real estate. As we read further, more revelations emerged. Tax evasion schemes. Bribes to city officials for favorable zoning decisions. A deliberate campaign to drive down property values in certain neighborhoods so the company could buy up land cheaply. Shell companies used to hide assets during Dad's divorce from his first wife, a woman I had never even known existed. "Jesus," Jason whispered as we made our way through the document. "Did you know any of this?" I shook my head, feeling sick. "No. I knew Dad played hardball sometimes, but this is criminal in some cases." "And all these properties," Jason said, pointing to a list of addresses. "They're all still part of the company portfolio. The company I now own." The implication was clear. Jason hadn't just inherited a legitimate business, he had inherited legal liability for decades of questionable practices, spent hours going through the safe's contents. The journals provided even more damning details, chronicling Dad's ruthless business tactics and the emotional toll they had taken on him. One journal from the year after Mom died was particularly difficult to read, as Dad described using work as an escape from grief, making increasingly aggressive and risky moves to avoid dealing with his emotions. The USB drives contained digital evidence, scanned documents, recorded conversations, spreadsheets tracking payments that had never appeared in the official company books. By the time we finished, night had fallen. We sat in Dad's office, surrounded by the wreckage of the image we had held of him. "He was setting me up," Jason said finally, his voice hollow. "Giving me ownership of a company built on fraud. If any of this ever came to light, not just you," I pointed out. "I've been running the company for the last 3 years. I signed off on decisions without knowing what came before." We were both silent for a long moment, processing the implications. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a final envelope that had been at the bottom of the safe. It was addressed to both of us, with "Open Last" written in large letters across the front. Inside was a letter, shorter than the one Susan had read at the will reading. "Michael and Jason, by now you've seen the truth about how Wells Real Estate was built. Every shortcut, every scheme, every line I crossed. The company you've inherited is successful, but its foundation is rotten. This is your test. Both of you. Not just whether you can work together, but whether you can do what I never had the courage to do, build something honest. Clean up the mess I've made. Make the Wells name stand for something better than clever fraud. Michael, you have the knowledge and the operational skill to guide the company through this transition. Jason, you have the vision and innovative thinking to reimagine what the company could become. Together, you might succeed where I failed. Apart, you will almost certainly fail, and decades of deception may come to light with consequences I cannot predict. The choice is yours. But know this, the 5-year arrangement I've created isn't just about teaching Jason responsibility or giving Michael his due. It's about giving you both the time and structure you need to either transform this company or dismantle it safely. I'm sorry for the burden I have placed on you both. More than that, I am sorry for being a father who taught you to compete rather than cooperate. Who played favorites and created divisions instead of unity. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you both, even if I showed it poorly. Dad, I finished reading and looked up at Jason. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. So that's it, he said flatly. The great inheritance. A company built on fraud and a mess to clean up. Pretty much, I agreed. What do we do now? It was the second time he had asked me that question today, but this time it carried the weight of our shared discovery. I don't know, I admitted. But I think we need to figure it out together. Jason nodded slowly. Together. The word hung between us, a possibility neither of us had considered before today. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I looked at my brother not as a rival or as the favored son, but as a partner in a challenge neither of us had anticipated. I could use some air, Jason said, standing. Want to walk? We left Dad's house and walked in silence through the neighborhood, past houses where nothing had changed while everything in our world had been upended. After a while, Jason spoke. You know, when Dad called to tell me about the will, that I was getting the company and everything else, I was in the middle of a crisis with my own business. The startup I'd been advising had just collapsed, taking most of my investment with it. Vanessa's family was pressuring us about wedding plans I couldn't afford. I was about to have to admit to everyone that I'd failed. Again. He paused, looking up at the night sky. When Dad told me what he was planning, it felt like a lifeline. Suddenly, all my problems were solved. I wouldn't have to admit failure. I could step into a ready-made success story. Is that why you never visited? I asked. You were ashamed? Jason nodded. Partly. And partly because I couldn't face you. You were always the successful one, the one who had Dad's respect. I was just the screw-up who would eventually inherit everything despite not deserving it. That's not how I saw it, I said quietly. I always thought Dad respected you more. You were free to pursue your dreams while I was stuck in the role he chose for me. Jason laughed bitterly. Looks like we were both wrong about a lot of things. We walked a bit further before I spoke again. For what it's worth, I think Dad was right about one thing. We do need each other to fix this mess. How do we even start? Jason asked. The scope of what we're dealing with, it's overwhelming. One step at a time, I said. First, we need legal advice, someone independent, not Susan. We need to understand exactly what liabilities we're facing. Then we need a strategy, Jason added. A way to clean up the company without destroying it completely. It won't be easy, I warned. Some of these practices are deeply embedded in how the company operates. Changing them will affect profitability, at least in the short term. Maybe that's okay, Jason said thoughtfully. Maybe a slightly less profitable but ethically sound company is better than what we have now. We had reached a small park and sat on a bench, continuing to talk into the night. For the first time in years, I felt like I was actually seeing my brother, not the golden child of my resentment, but a complex human being with his own struggles and insecurities. As we walked back to Dad's house under the quiet stars, an unspoken understanding had formed between us. Years of resentment were beginning to crack, revealing something unexpected beneath. You know, I said, breaking the silence, I always thought that running Wells Real Estate was my destiny. Now I'm not so sure I even want it. Jason looked at me with surprise. What would you do instead? I shrugged. I've been thinking about starting my own development company. Something smaller, more focused on sustainable building practices. I've had ideas brewing for years but never had the courage to leave Dad's shadow. That sounds actually pretty great, Jason admitted. We reached Dad's house, soon to be Jason's, and stood awkwardly in the driveway. Stay for one more drink? Jason offered. We've got a lot more to figure out. Inside, we poured 2 glasses of Dad's expensive scotch and settled into the living room. The house felt different now, as if Dad's final revelations had changed the very air within its walls. So here's what I'm thinking, Jason said, leaning forward. What if we use the 5-year arrangement to our advantage? You guide the company through the cleanup process while I learn the business from the ground up, the right way. Then we can decide together what happens next. You'd be willing to start at the bottom? I asked skeptically. Not the very bottom, Jason grinned, but close enough. I need to understand this business if I'm going to own it responsibly. And I need your help. I considered his proposal. We'll need outside help, forensic accountants, lawyers we can trust. This won't be quick or easy. I know. But think about it, we could actually rebuild the company into something we're proud of. Something clean. As we talked into the night, a plan began to take shape. We would quietly address the legal vulnerabilities one by one, making restitution where necessary. We would phase out the questionable practices that had become standard operating procedure. And most importantly, we would do it together, combining my operational knowledge with Jason's fresh perspective over the next 5 years, Wells Real Estate transformed. The process wasn't always smooth, there were heated arguments, setbacks, and moments when we both questioned whether it was worth the effort. But gradually, we built something better than what Dad had left us. I taught Jason the business, and he brought in new ideas that modernized our approach. The company became smaller initially as we divested from properties with questionable acquisitions, but eventually grew stronger with transparent practices and innovative projects. Jason's fiancée Vanessa proved to be an unexpected ally, her background in corporate law helping us navigate the complicated cleanup process. My daughter Lily, initially skeptical of my renewed relationship with her uncle, eventually joined the company during summer breaks from college, bringing her own perspective to our family business. When the 5-year mark approached, Jason and I met at the same coffee shop where we had first discussed Dad's strange inheritance arrangement. So, Jason said, the 5 years are almost up. Have I proven myself worthy of running the company? I smiled. That's not really the question anymore, is it? No, he agreed. I guess it's not. What we had built was no longer simply Dad's company that one of us would control. It was our company, a true partnership that had emerged from Dad's manipulative bequest. In the end, we restructured the ownership. Jason retained majority shares, but I kept a significant stake and we established a formal board with both of us serving as co-chairs. The Wells name now represented something we had created together, not the tainted legacy Dad had left us. On the anniversary of Dad's death, 5 years after that fateful will reading, Jason and I visited his grave together. We stood side by side, 2 brothers who had found their way back to each other through the most unlikely of circumstances. Do you think this is what he intended all along? Jason asked, staring at the headstone. For us to actually become brothers again? I don't know, I said honestly. Dad was manipulative until the end. But maybe he did understand something about us that we didn't see ourselves. That we're stronger together than apart? Something like that. As we walked away from the cemetery, I realized that Dad's final gift hadn't been the company or the money. It had been the chance to rediscover my brother, to build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition. It had been the opportunity to create something honest out of something flawed. The silent inheritance, it turned out, was the wisdom to see beyond the material legacy to the human one, the understanding that family, when it works as it should, gives us the strength to face our greatest challenges. Jason clapped me on the shoulder. Ready for that board meeting tomorrow? I hear my co-chair can be a real hard ass. Only when necessary, I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Together, we walked toward the future, not the one Dad had mapped out for us, but one we had chosen for ourselves.